So we're 2 minutes past the hour, and I'm aware of everyone's time. So as people keep entering, I will start the introductions. So welcome to the Winter Lecture Series. I'm Audrey Thorsted, Programming Associate at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, or HMML, as many people know it. This is our second gathering in the Winter Lecture Series for 2025. So welcome back if you were at the last one, and we're glad you're here. So we hope you'll join for the rest of the lectures in this series. They're held virtually every fourth Wednesday of the month through April. So there are 2 more, and we hope you will register and attend both. Now, one goal for this series is to provide a platform for scholars to share findings they've uncovered through the study of manuscripts, both physical and digital, cared for in our collections, while at the same time getting people like you excited about what manuscripts can tell us. And indeed, getting excited about manuscripts is something HMML has been doing for 60 years, and we do it very well. If you're new here, HMML is an international organization based out of Minnesota in the United States. Our purpose is to preserve and share the world's handwritten past to inspire a deeper understanding of our present and future. Handwritten books or manuscripts are clues documenting what humans over thousands of years thought important enough to share. And it's incredible what these voices from the past have to tell and teach us. Therefore, we photograph manuscripts around the world so their contents can be available for centuries to come. We place a special priority on manuscripts located in regions endangered by war, political instability, or other threats. Preservation begins through partnerships with local libraries, agreements that allow HMML to make digital images of the manuscripts in their collections. Digitization is done entirely through local teams to whom we provide equipment, training, technical support, and payment for their work. We photograph everything in a collection because we simply don't know what might be significant in the future. Copies of these digital images are given to the archive or library that holds the manuscripts, and another copy comes to HMML here in Minnesota. HMML employs catalogers and other staff to ensure that the digital images of these manuscripts are identified, supported for long-term access, and made freely available to the public via our website. Scholars from all around the world visit HMML both physically at our location on St. John's University campus and virtually in our reading room, which houses millions of photographs and manuscripts. This series gives us an opportunity to introduce and hear from some of these scholars whose work enhances and increases our understanding of the manuscripts in this collection. And programs like this are free and open to the public thanks to generosity of the community of donors. Our work is solely funded by donations and grants. Please consider donating to HMML online at hmml.org. Your donation will allow for continued effort in preserving our global cultural heritage. And a quick note about our next lecture is going to be on Wednesday, March 26th, same time, same place. And you're going to hear from another HMML cataloger on Armenian manuscripts. So please make sure to register and join us in a month's time. Today's lecture will be today's webinar will be about an hour in length. So we'll hear from Dr. Jeremy Brown in just a bit, and then we'll have time at the end for questions. For this lecture, we're using the Q&A chat function on Zoom, and this can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can type in your question anytime during the presentation, and we'll try and get to as many questions as we can today. If we are inundated with lots of questions, Dr. Brown has kindly agreed to stay a few minutes past the hour so he can ensure to answer as many questions as possible. So to introduce our speaker, I'm very, very excited to be joined by one of HMML's own catalogers. Dr. Jeremy R. Brown is the cataloger of Ethiopic manuscripts here at HMML. He joined us in 2023 and holds a BA from George Fox University, an MA from Portland Seminary in Oregon, and a PhD from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Before HMML, Dr. Brown was the senior researcher, cataloger, and translator for the Princeton, Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Egyptian Miracles of Mary Digital Humanities Project. He was also a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Languages and Literature at Catholic University of America. So without further ado, welcome and thank you for joining us today, Dr. Brown. I hope you all enjoy his presentation called Inspired Grace, the Ethiopic Miracles of Mary. Dr. Brown, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you everybody for being here. It's a great pleasure to get to talk with you all today. So with a work like the Miracles of Mary, I could tell you about stories. That's less desirable. I'd rather tell you a story. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with a little story time. I want to tell you about the man from Kemer. So, once upon a time, there was a man in the city of Kemer who belonged to an honorable family. He was a Christian in name, but his sin was greater and more learned than anyone ever. He was exceedingly wealthy. However, he did not eat bread nor the meat of cattle or livestock. Rather, he ate the flesh of people. The people whom he ate numbered about 78 souls. His friends, his loved ones, and his steward were all consumed and came to an end. Then some of his servants fled lest he eat them too. Having been left alone with just his wife and his 2 children, he ate them as well. Even they could not move that madman to pity. At that time, he departed from his house, carrying nothing with him from his wealth except for 1 drinking vessel of water and a bow adorned with gold. While walking, he found a farmer tilling, and the man-eater watched him, stalking him in order to kill him. Oh, sorry. I'm seeing a comment. Thank you, Audrey. Let me see if I can share a different screen. Thank you, thank you. How's that one? Cool. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me there. Zoom, it gives and it takes. Okay, so now we've got the cannibal moving along on his journey. So he's carrying his water vessel and a bow adorned with gold. And while walking, he found a farmer tilling, and the man-eater watched him, stalking him in order to kill him. When he recognized that the farmer was stronger than him, he stopped. He went to the farmer and spoke to him a greeting. Then he said to him, "Dear man, sell me an ox." The farmer said to him, "What are you going to give me for an ox?" And the man-eater said to him, "Please take my bow that's bound up with gold." The farmer said to him, "Bread is better than anything else. I refuse you." The man-eater said to him, "I'll add in 3 arrows." The farmer replied, "I will not give it to you." Then the man-eater said to the farmer, "Please show me a cave that I might spend the night there." The farmer said, "Why don't you dwell in a house? Look, we're near a village." The man-eater replied, "I will not stay in a house. Rather show me a cave." The farmer said to him, "I recognize you. I recognize that you're a noble and belong to an honorable family, but your heart is abominable and fraudulent, and you are like that certain rich man who resides in the city of Kemer." And the man-eater answered him, "Oh, my friend, why would you consider me to be like him?" Then the farmer showed him a cave, and the man-eater departed, carrying with him his canteen of water. As he was going up the ascent, the man-eater came upon a man whose entire body was scabby and leprous. The man-eater knew that the power was entirely in his hands, and he wanted to eat that poor man. However, he abhorred the poor man on account that he was covered in sores. That poor man was exceedingly thirsty, and he pleaded, "Give me a drink for the sake of God." The man-eater reprimanded him and loathed him. The poor man said to him again, "For the sake of the heavens and earth, give me a drink." And the man-eater reprimanded him again. Then the poor man said to him a third time, "For the sake of the saints and the martyrs, give me a drink." The man-eater loathed him all the more, saying to him, "Go away, you foul man." The poor man said to him a 4th time, "For the sake of the name of Our Lady Mary, the Holy Virgin, give me a drink before my life passes away." And the man-eater said to him, "Say that again." The poor man said to him, "I said to you, for the sake of the name of Our Lady Mary." The man-eater said to him, "Truly I have heard from my youth that she is good, that she delivers with her prayer, and she rescues souls from Sheol, and so I put my trust in her." So he said to the poor man, "Please take a drink for the sake of the name of Our Lady Mary." Only a handful of water went into that poor man's throat, and he started to choke, and the man-eater refused to give him any more water, saying, "Don't finish this on my account." When the poor man went on his way and the man-eater entered a cave, he said, "Death is better for me than eating bread." And after a little while, he died in hunger and thirst. Then the angels of darkness came, accompanied by their hosts with terror and fear. They surrounded him, bringing out his soul with deceit and force. But Our Lady Mary, the Holy Virgin, also came in order to investigate if she might find a good deed he'd done. The angels said to Our Lady Mary, "Our Lady, is there anything worse under heaven than the sins of this rich man?" Our Lady Mary saw by the man-eater's side about a handful of water that the poor man had drunk as charity in the name of Our Lady Mary, the Holy Virgin. At that moment, Mary rejoiced. And know, my dear friends, to every Christian soul who dies, Our Lady Mary, the Holy Virgin, comes. The angels of darkness then brought that soul before God with fear and trembling. Then the word from heaven came out, "Banish that soul into weeping and the gnashing of teeth." But Our Lady Mary bowed and said, "Have mercy for me, my son, have mercy for me." The Lord said, "What good deed is in him? Didn't he eat 78 people? Our Lady Mary, the Holy Virgin, said to him, "Because he gave water to drink to a poor man is charity for the sake of my name. You've told me that anyone who performs my remembrance and cries out my name shall live the life that is eternal." The Lord Jesus said, "My gift of glorification does not lie. Bring the scales, weigh that water that he gave to drink for the sake of the name of Mary, my mother, on one side, and those 78 souls on the other side." They weighed them, and that handful of water prevailed, conquering the 78 souls that you can see in the scale here. Then the angels of light celebrated with shouts of joy. Thus that soul came into life by the prayer of Our Lady Mary, the Holy Virgin. My dear friends, this is how that man-eater was saved, because of a handful of water. How much more so for those who perform her remembrance, build her church, and believe in her prayer. They shall find glory and favor without falsehood. Our dear Lady Mary, by your prayer and by your intercession, also give tenfold mercy to us forever and ever. Amen. And that's the Cannibal of Kemmer. And that's one of the stories that made me fall in love with the miracles of Mary, because you just never know what might happen. So to give you a little background on what the miracles of Mary are, so these are stories that take place during Mary's life and also after her life. Some of the stories that are about Mary's life draw on really early source material, like the four Gospels, but as we know, the Gospels in the Bible don't give Mary a lot of airtime. She only has a couple lines of text, she only appears a few times, and yet these stories imagine what else life must have held for Mary. Similarly to the infancy Gospels, which are also a source, and imagine more of the life of the Holy Family and Jesus when he was young. And also texts like the vision of Theophilus of Alexandria that imagine what life must have been like for Mary. They have lots of themes going on in the Miracles of Mary stories: healing, protection from danger, resurrection, care and the birth of children, miraculous journeys, provision for daily needs like food and clothing, and also the monastic life and all the struggles that can go along with that. An important thing to remember with the Miracles of Mary is expect the unexpected. It is very rare that the story goes exactly how you think it will, and I've read hundreds of these. And I'm still surprised every time I read one that sometimes somebody prays for healing and you go, "Oh, I know how this is going to work. They're going to be healed." And sometimes they are, and sometimes Mary says, "Well, the best thing I can offer is you'll be with me in heaven tomorrow." And so sometimes these stories just don't go the way you expect. When my translation partner Dawit Mulina and I translate I think probably the most common word that comes out is, oh, as we don't see what was coming until it happens. And you're like, oh, I didn't expect that. What's going to happen next? So let's talk a little bit about the origins of these stories. So we know that these stories were being composed and collected in the Levant by the early 7th century. These stories captured the imagination. One example is John Moscas, who dies in 619. He writes The Spiritual Meadow, and he says that a bunch of the miracle stories that he collected there, he found while traveling in the Levant in Egypt. This genre makes its way to the Catholic West and really grows in popularity during the 12th and 13th century. And as it moves into places like France, Italy, Spain, and Germany, it picks up new stories. So not only is this a collection of stories from the Levant and from Egypt, but these are new stories as well. It goes to France and stories from Mount St. Michel come. It goes to Spain and stories from Santiago were added. As these stories reach each of the new pilgrimage sites, new stories about Mary's action in the world come to be added. These stories were composed in French and Latin and other European vernaculars, and they get collected into some really grand manuscripts in the Florilegia genre to be used as source material for sermons. We see one of those examples here. And then the stories in this collection start to come back home. Now, undoubtedly, Miracles of Mary stories had stayed in the Levant and Egypt the whole time, but this collection that had gone on walkabout in Europe now comes back home. They're translated into Arabic by the 13th century, and this collection finds an audience in the Levant and Egypt. They're transmitted in collections as large as 75 miracles in a single manuscript and as small as a single miracle. And these manuscripts have been digitized by HMML and our partners in places like Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. And an interesting side note, there's a collection of miracles in Arabic that never make their way to Ethiopia. We're heading towards Ethiopia soon, I promise. And that's the collection by Agapios Landos of Crete. He composes or collects 68 miracles in Greek. It's translated into Arabic, but these stories don't make their way to Ethiopia. To show you some of the examples of the stories in Arabic, we see 3 manuscripts here, all written in Arabic, but all written in different scripts. We see a manuscript in Arabic script from Egypt, and then 2 manuscripts, one from Iraq and one from Turkey, in Arabic, but in Garshuni, which is Arabic written in Syriac script. And here we see 2 different Syriac scripts being used. So an interesting part of the text in Garshuni is a lot of earlier scholarship about the miracles of Mary in Egypt say that this was just an Egyptian tradition, that these stories weren't widely copied, didn't really make their way out of Egypt when they were translated from the European languages into Arabic. But the work from HMML shows that's not true, that these stories moved around the Arabic-speaking Christian world, and we see examples from places like Iraq and Turkey. And then the stories make their way to Ethiopia. By the end of the 14th century, the miracles of Mary are translated into Ge'ez or Ethiopic, and they're called the Tamra Mariam. Our 2 earliest dated manuscripts can be dated to the reign of Emperor Dawit II, who reigned from 1379 to 1413. And I'm going to show you both those manuscripts because they're spectacular. So the first one here is HMML 9002, which has lots of beautiful paintings of Mary and the baby Jesus and the Emperor Dawit kneeling down and paying reverence to them. So we see that here, and as well as being attended by the 2 archangels. The second manuscript is Bethlehem Giant 1, which we see here in the illumination of Mary being presented in the temple when she's 3 years old. And so these 2 manuscripts are our earliest dated manuscripts. They're our first snapshot into this collection making their way into Ethiopia. But to really tell the story of how these miracles of Mary make their way into Ethiopia and grow into the tremendous genre and presence that they are today in the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox churches, we have to kind of zoom in on the first 8 stories. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about them. One of the manuscripts that holds these stories is this manuscript kept in Berlin with this beautiful illumination of Mary and baby Jesus. So the first of these early miracle stories is the rich man who threw dry bread to a beggar. And this is a great story about a sinful rich man who angrily throws a hard loaf of bread at a man begging for food during one of Mary's feast days. Despite getting hit in the head so hard that he's bleeding, the poor man is thankful for the rich man's generosity. And the rich man died that very night, and Mary saved his soul from damnation on account of this act of mercy during her feast. We hear some echoes to the story we just read together from the Cannibal of Kemer. The second story is the cannibal. Now we've met him, so we'll keep moving forward. The third story is the sinful deacon whom his enemies could not kill. So this is a story about a deacon who has only one good deed. He went to Mary's church every single day to pray. Other than that, he's got nothing. One day, he was attacked by his enemies, and they repeatedly beat him, stabbed him, clubbed him, did all kinds of terrible things, and he wouldn't die. Then the deacon told his enemies, Mary won't let me die unless I get to make final confession. So the enemies went, got a priest, and the deacon confessed, and then he died. And he went to heaven, and the enemies all repented because they felt bad and served Mary for the rest of their lives. The next story is the pilgrim to Santiago, who Satan persuaded to mutilate himself after falling into a sexual sin. For the sake of keeping this talk G-rated and not getting taken down from YouTube, I'm going to omit some of the details. You should go read this story. But a man committed a sin while on his way to join a monastery. Satan appears to the man and convinces him to harm himself, and he dies in the process. While the angels of darkness are escorting this man's soul to hell, the abbot of the monastery and the St. Peter suddenly sprout wings, fly up, capture the angels of darkness as they're carrying the soul to hell, and bring everybody to the divine courtroom for Mary to hear the case. Mary decides to revive the dead man, and he finally makes his way to the monastery and becomes a faithful monk. The next story is the priest who could only say the Mass of the Virgin Mary. So this particular priest, sometimes named Andrew, only knew the Mass of the Virgin Mary. He didn't know any others. Some manuscripts tell us he really tried, it just wasn't working out. And finally, his congregation complained to the bishop, saying he says the same service every time. And the bishop stopped the priest from performing the Mass. Ultimately, Mary comforts the priest and gives him a strategy to get him reappointed by the bishop. The next story is the widow who prayed to the Virgin Mary and saved her only son from death by hanging. And pay attention here to the mechanism by which grace is found. It's a fascinating one. A pious poor widow woman's only family was her son. She prayed for him daily in Mary's church. But he fell into bad company and got caught stealing. He was hanged for 3 days for this offense. When his mother went to pray at the church, another churchgoer told her what had happened. The mother then went to Mary's icon and threatened her, saying, if you do not rescue my son, I will take your son from your lap in his place. At that very moment, her son walked into the church with a great crowd of people. When asked, he told his mother, Mary has been holding me up for 3 days, and just moments ago, she freed the noose from around my neck and said, go to your mom. The next story is the young man who used to bring roses to the icon of the Virgin Mary. So a young man would visit the icon of Mary every day and make her a crown of 50 roses. But the season of roses passed, and he didn't know what to do. He was ashamed that he didn't have a gift to bring anymore. So he decided, I'll pray the Hail Mary 50 times every day in their place. He continued this practice for every day of his life. And when he died, a beautiful tree instantly sprouted out of his tomb, and each of the leaves had the Hail Mary written upon them. And then the last of these 8 first beginning stories, the only one out of these 8 that's never been painted, is the Virgin Mary appears to an official who kidnapped a young woman who had made a vow of virginity. A young woman pledged her virginity to Mary, but an official heard about her beauty and attempted to marry her by force. She warns the man, "I'm dedicated to Mary," and when the official dares to ask, "Who is this Mary that I should give up on such a beautiful woman?" Mary appears and makes it very clear exactly who she is. The official is so thoroughly convinced, he decides to become a monk instead. So these are the first 8 stories, and this becomes the foundation upon which the rest of this genre is built. So the manuscripts produced during the reign of Emperor Dawit II take this total number of miracles from 8 up to 83, and these 83 miracles make up the core of the tradition for the next 100 years. But that is not the end of the story. That is just the beginning of the expansion of this tradition. So the miracles of Mary and their rise in prominence really happens when Emperor Dawit II's son, Emperor Tsar Yaakov, who reigned from 1434 to 1468, takes the scene and really emphasizes the importance of Saint Mary within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. He's a religious and theological reformer, and he says that the miracles of Mary are to be a part of the Sunday liturgy and of the Marian feast celebrations. And from a practical side, one could imagine that having 83 stories and needing to read 3 every Sunday meant we need more stories fast. And that's exactly what happens. This provides the motivation for more stories to be written and translated. So we know during the reign of Emperor Tsar Yaakov, over 50 new stories enter the Miracles of Mary tradition in Ethiopic. Lots of these stories are set in monasteries, which is really interesting and deserving of more study. And we know that Emperor Tsar Yaakov commissioned a number of Miracles of Mary manuscripts to be sent throughout the country, probably both as a resource and to drive home these theological changes that he'd made. But it doesn't stop there either. It continues. We know by the beginning of the reign of Emperor Lebna Dengel, who reigned from 1508 to 1540, the corpus of Dawit II, those original 83, has more than doubled to nearly 200 stories. And the scribes of Emperor Lebna Dengel don't slow down. They pour on the gas. Dozens of new stories are brought into the tradition. And this involves a lot of reworking of stories that are about other saints, but mention Mary, and they come to feature Mary and are worked into the miracles here. Both from books like the Synaxarion or the Syncasar, as well as things like the Coptic Book of the Patriarchs. Just like Emperor Tsar Yaakov before him, Lebna Dengel commissions a lot of manuscripts. I'm aware of at least 12 manuscripts commissioned by Lebna Dengel, and they were sent out throughout the country to churches and monasteries to be used there. And there's a really interesting thing that happens where old things become new again, that the old stories are reframed. A lot of the old stories are told in a real timeless way. Once upon a time, there was a guy in a place. And these stories become really specific during Lebna Dengel's reign. There was a man named Zachariah in the city of Rome. He was of royal lineage, whereas the original version of that story was there was a guy in a place. Similarly, the story of the pregnant abbess, it's just told in the old version of the story that there was a woman who was an abbess in a monastery or in a convent, but the new version of the story, she gains a name, Sophia. The name of her convent is given as Mount Carmel. So these new stories, or these new versions of the stories, get a lot more specific, a lot more detail. They also gain liturgical elements. They have hymns at the end. They have homilies. These are things meant to be used in church. And so the miracles of Mary start to gain new life. They're not just saintly stories, but they're texts to be used in a liturgical way as well. In the 1600s, the miracles of Mary start to be illuminated. And this is a really astounding transformation of the genre. They're beautiful paintings. It's not to say that Miracles of Mary manuscripts before the 1600s weren't painted. They were, but they were paintings of Mary's life. So Mary holding the baby Jesus, Mary and John the Evangelist at the foot of the cross for the crucifixion. These kinds of paintings were very common, but the paintings of the stories didn't really happen. until the 1600s. And it's also worth pointing out that a single painting may illuminate several moments of a miracle. So this painting here is about the Bishop Ildefonsus in Gez, known as Daxis, how he composes and gathers together the miracles of Mary for the first time and presents the book to Mary. And so we see at least 3 different scenes being played out in this painting. This one's nice. It has captions written in it, so we don't miss anything. Oftentimes, we're not that lucky when we're studying paintings. And by the 1700s, some changes happen in the illumination tradition. A series of 30 to 32 stories becomes the central stories that you paint. If you're going to paint some stories, you're probably going to paint these 30 to 32 or 3. But that's not to say they're the only stories that get painted. Over 100 different stories have been illuminated at some point in the tradition. And some of the really important ones are in collections here at HMML, like HMML 76 has a bunch of paintings of stories that aren't painted anywhere else. So really important and interesting to see how that plays out. And it's worth pointing out that half of our first 8 stories are a part of this core group. And so these stories that start off the tradition keep themselves in prominence all the way through. I also want to point out, if we look back at the previous slide, notice the change in how these stories are painted. So the older story or older painting style, we see there's no background color, different approach to the margins and the borders, a different color palette than the one from the 1700s. These are actually 2 paintings of the exact same scene. And so we can really see the transformation over time of the painting style. And this expansion continues. It's an ever-expanding tradition. So the core of the tradition is built upon these stories that are translated or copied or composed by the mid-1500s. So there's lots of ways that these stories make their way to Ethiopia. But this tradition prizes creativity. So even though there's a set core from before the mid-1500s, there's room for innovation. 5% of manuscripts have at least one story that is unique, one of a kind, only in that one manuscript. Now, most manuscripts don't have a lot of uniqueness in them. Nearly half of the manuscripts in this 5% have just a single unique story. 82% of those manuscripts have 3 or less unique stories. And only 3 out of the 974 manuscripts we've studied as a part of the Princeton Ethiopic, Eritrean, and Egyptian Miracles of Mary project have more than 10 unique stories in them. And really the crown jewel of that unique tradition is HMML 6835 that we see here. This manuscript from Debre Zamato Monastery has 78 unique stories, and a lot of them were translated by the late Professor Getachew Haile's book, Voices from Debre Zamato. It's just a remarkable manuscript. And one of the reasons I tell you about these unique stories is a lot of times they're centered in the places that the manuscripts are from, which is really remarkable. Davies' manuscript that he digitized or photographed in Debre Wark has such a miracle that it's only ever been seen in this one manuscript from Debre Wark. And they're also a lot of times really relatable stories. I'm thinking of a story that is a deacon who says, I got to the church early to light the candles for prayer, and the candlestick was too close to the curtains, and I set the curtains on fire. But Mary came and put it out. I believe that miracle. I think that one really happened, and I have a feeling that the scribe was that particular deacon. This trajectory of expansion keeps on going. So in the mid-1980s, William F. Macomber, who was the cataloger of Eastern Christian manuscripts here at HMML, produced a hand list of 643 miracles without a computer, with a typewriter. It's an incredible amount of work. I don't know how he did it. And the Princeton Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Egyptian Miracles of Mary project has identified 300 more miracles to be added to Macomber's list. So we're now looking at a genre that started with 8 stories, that's now at 950 stories. So much creativity, so much innovation is happening in this tradition over time. And it's also worth pointing out that this tradition continues today. So of the stories identified by Macomber and by Pem, 85 of these stories appear for the first time in 20th and 21st century manuscripts. So these stories are still happening. And 117 additional stories beyond those entered the tradition through the print editions that happened in the 20th century. So as the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox churches have adopted using print manuscripts alongside of manuscript or print editions alongside manuscripts written on parchment, more stories have entered the tradition. And so the reason I've told you this story that starts with 8 miracles and works its way up to 950 is to show that this is an Ethiopian and Eritrean tradition. Something that you often would read in older scholarship would say the Miracles of Mary are a translation. And while it's true that the Miracles of Mary arrived in Ethiopia as a translation, some of the stories from Europe, more of them from Egypt, that they don't stay a translation. They're incorporated and they become a living part of the Ethiopian and Eritrean tradition. This is motivated by theological reform and liturgical use, and these things become thoroughly Ethiopian and Eritrean. Hundreds of new stories are composed there. Stories are adapted for use in the church. They add homilies, they add hymns. It's just a really important living tradition that moves far beyond just being a translation. If you're interested in learning more, the first place to head is over to Reading Room at vhimmel.org, and you can see hundreds of Miracles of Mary manuscripts there, and more manuscript image sets are being added every week, and more manuscripts are being cataloged every day. So you'll keep on finding new ones, I promise. And you can also head over to the PEM website where you'll find descriptions of over 950 stories. About 600 of them have English translations, as well as details on over 970 manuscripts and descriptions and images of about 2,500 paintings from Miracles of Mary manuscripts. So if you're interested in either of those resources, you can see the links here, vhimmel.org and pem.princeton.edu. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you this afternoon.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I imagine everyone on the webinar is applauding, even if we can't see you. Thank you so much for that wonderful journey and surprising. You're right. Every story you told has a surprising twist that you're not expecting. Where is Mary going to pop up, and what is she going to do? And at the same time, they're so personable. They're relatable, as you say. You can totally see someone accidentally setting church curtains on fire when they're going in the morning to light a candle. I just absolutely love that story.